I know you're
database.
going back to
Now getting back
you're going back to your talking
the
points.
medication.
No, just hold on 1 second. You're going back to your talking points, but we probably went over this for the first 45 minutes. If we can't identify in those research that you've conducted that there is clearly an identifiable medical illness, that unfortunately is just going to invalidate and dispute a lot of your statements.
And we
so
debated
why would we go back and do that?
I was just kind of summarizing what we had shown. Now, specifically,
but I don't want
the
to. I don't want to
medications.
go there because I don't think it's valid, and I made my argument on why I don't think it's valid. I don't think you can. I actually think it's dangerous to say that you can apply a blanket medical diagnosis without ever evaluating somebody, and then trying to infer about who a person is from media reporting or even law enforcement. Prior to coming on this podcast, I interviewed a few people in law enforcement about these very issues. When it comes to homicide, I want to know, like, to what extent do you order our toxicology reports, for example, ordered? And to what degree do we look at mental illness as being a major factor in completion of that? And I think from a law enforcement perspective, they're going to say, first and foremost, we're trying to convict that person. So they're gathering evidence. It's not in their purview to order toxicology reports or even look into the role of any type of substances involved in that. That might be the defense, for example. So it's not something that's consistent in being able to identify that there could be, an unmedicated person or a medicated person. So there's so many methodological problems with your work. I don't want to get into like a long form discussion to say, well, we know this and we know this, because that's what academics do. They're so used to saying we know, and then you communicate it definitively, and then everyone passively accepts that information as if it's true and begins regurgitating it over and over again. And same with this chemical imbalance nonsense and trying to reduce the complexity of the human experience to like one neurochemical when you admit that maybe on a scale of 1 to 10, we understand a 1. There's so much of contradiction in your statements when you just have to improve the way you deliver the information. If you improve the way you deliver the information to be more accurate, we have a safer culture, a safer society, because a lot of this is pseudoscientific nonsense being communicated with certainty. And that's my biggest problem, because people deserve informed consent. There is no way we should have 1 in 4, 1 in 5 people on psychiatric drugs in the United States. Absolutely no way. And if you want to make an argument that, there's a percentage of people in this country truly, truly suffering, we're going to use this diagnostic criteria. We're going to refer to it as illness. We're going to put it under the medical system. And in some situations, these drugs can improve a quality of life. Then I'm open with you, because then we can talk about who, when, what, where, under what conditions. But that is not what's happening in the United States. What's happening in the United States is there's a lot of propaganda from the pharmaceutical companies that was being spewed back to me today under the disguise as if it's legitimate science, which is exactly what's happening to the primary care doctors. The primary care doctors are writing SSRI prescriptions because they're told exactly what you were told. There's no risk for increased suicidality. They're protective against suicide. Ignore the black box warnings as if the international community just somehow pulled that out of the thin air to be conservative. No, that's not true. The data is absolutely overwhelming. The more you dig into this with court documents, it's dark as hell. I mean, it's really, really dark. And when you talk about methodology, like a pure scientist, like I want to be a pure scientist because I believe in the search for truth. And when you create trials where there's a placebo washing period, when overwhelming amount of trials themselves show that the placebo group outperforms the drug group, and you don't have to publish those, well, then you have a crisis of credibility in research, because all the totality of the data is not provided to our academics. And that's publication bias. And that in itself is indisputable. There's a clear problem with publication bias, being able to replicate data over and over again. And of course, there's no doubt in mental health in the psychiatric field that there's a credibility issue around validity of psychiatric diagnosis. They're overlapped. 65, 70% of those on committees in the DSM receive pharmaceutical money. So you have to be aware of what my listening audience and the global audience that listens to this, they're aware of this information now. So are docs around the world. There are psychiatrists that are pulling themselves out of the system because of this. And they're funneling themselves into burgeoning new research opportunities and treatment opportunities. Functional nutrition or nutritional psychiatry, for example, metabolic conditions. They're pulling people off the drugs and they're getting better. People are getting better when they're being pulled off the drugs safely. We didn't even get into the problem with what happens when someone abruptly stops the drugs, when someone's tapered off too quickly, which is standard care in the United States. Because we know violence and suicide increase under a number of conditions. Starting a new drug, increasing the dose of a new drug, decreasing the dose of a new drug, adding a drug, and the most dangerous is abruptly stopping a drug. And all those are very, very dangerous conditions. And we prescribe these drugs to teenagers and kids. And my practice is overwhelmed because we see the results of this. They decide to take their drug for a period of time, then they just stop it. Then they have all those symptoms, which is the withdrawal effect of those drugs. They become suicidal. Maybe not because the drug induced suicide, but what happens to the brain, and when you abruptly stop that drug, that can induce akathisia, that can induce worsening mood, that has induced psychosis in a percentage of people. There's a lot of dangerous aspects to haphazardly prescribing powerful psychoagents like this. And it's just so important we provide the public a service to make sure this is clearly identified and discussed. Because as a practitioner in the community and someone who started a nonprofit around informed consent and medical freedom, it's my duty, it's my calling to make sure that people understand the risks that are associated with medical interventions. And we just have to be so careful in the way we communicate. I understand how academics communicate because I got my doctorate in clinical psychology, so you're surrounded by academics. And I go off to various conferences and I hear academics talk about how they present literature. It's the same language, right? We know this, or this is pretty clear, until it gets disputed 5 years down the line or 10 years down the line with new evidence. Why would we want to use that language? We know this. Like, this is the same thing that happened in COVID that created so many problems across this country by obtaining like this level of certainty that's clearly not true.